Second Corinthians, First Corinthians rather, chapter 2, is where Paul is teaching a lesson to the church of Corinth, and then he kind of stopped and he said, you know what, you can't even understand this if you're not in the Spirit. If you're not a spiritual person, you can't even receive these truths from the Spirit of God. He says it's just all going to sound foolish to you because you're in the flesh. And so, but that's kind of what he was talking about there. Is like, he says, y'all need to pray through so you can really understand what I'm trying to teach you here. is what he was saying. And but that's the thing. And walking in the Spirit, I find, is not a once and for all thing. We don't conquer our flesh once and for all basis, but it's something that it takes constant maintenance, right? Just like mowing our lawns, or anything we wash around the house, washing our own bodies. Even I just come back from camp with the teenagers, and you have to remind them, hey, you need to take a bath today. You need to jump in that shower, son. You're starting to smell. But so that's just the same thing in our spirits. We don't just conquer our flesh one time at an altar when we accept the Lord, but it's a ongoing battle. It's an ongoing maintenance, and sometimes you could feel like you're spiritual and you think you got it all figured out, and finally you're walking in the Spirit on a daily basis, and all of a sudden something happens, and there's a flare up, right? Anything sometimes can cause a fleshly flare up. It can cause your old nature to rise to the surface. Sometimes it could be just a conversation, or it could be receiving bad news. It can be just somebody rubbing you the wrong way, somebody driving the wrong way in front of you or behind you in traffic. And so, we can learn real quick that our fleshly nature is still there. But what's good is that we need to use, what we can do is use those incidences to learn from. And we can learn about ourselves and say, okay, I didn't know that was still there. I didn't know I was still capable of even feeling that way or thinking those thoughts. And then we can use that as a time of purging, and we can go back to the Lord and say, Lord, take these things from me. Purge my spirit. Many of you know I grew up with a dad who was a shrimper, so I spent a lot of my summers, I tell you stories sometimes of growing up in the summer times, spending time with my dad on his shrimp boat. And on the shrimp boat, what we would do, if there was a lot of fish, a lot of times you'd catch plenty of fish as just a bycatch of catching shrimp. And what you'd want to do is take those fish out. And sometimes if it wasn't too many fish, and you could just take them out by hand, and it wasn't a big deal. But if it was sometimes almost 50-50, or you had too much fish to really take out by hand, so what we'd do is we'd have this large tub of water that we would add some extra salt to it. And adding extra salt to it, it would cause those fish to float. Fish are more buoyant than shrimp, and so the fish would float. You get the mixture just right, and all the fish would float to the top, and you could scoop them out with a dip net, and the shrimp would still be on the bottom. So you scoop out all the fish, and then you could take your shrimp and then finish cleaning it by hand if there was anything left. And so, but that reminds me of a lot of the ways God purges us sometimes. A lot of times He'll send us through these salty situations, and just to kind of purge, just to kind of show us what's still beneath the surface in our hearts, in our spirits, and just things that are buried inside of us that we didn't even know was there. And a lot of times it doesn't come out until we go through that salty situation. But what's good is that we need to learn from those things and recognize them, not get full of condemnation, and not get down on ourselves and say, oh, how could I do such a thing? I've been walking with the Lord for so long, and now look what I've done. No, but it's just time to learn and to grow and to say, hey, I'm still in the flesh, and as long as I'm still on earth, I'm always going to have to deal with this flesh. But the best thing I could do is just learn to get better and better, and to walk in the Spirit more and more frequently. And so walking in the Spirit, or being spiritual, it just means that your spirit is in charge. Your spirit is the one making the decisions. Understand that we're made of three different things, right? Body, soul, and spirit. And so our spirit is the part of us that comes from God. God made Adam's body, and then he breathed in his nostrils, it says, and he became a living soul. And so what that is that spirit comes from God, and so it knows what God likes. And so the spirit is supposed to make the decisions.